She had served her country with honor, a life defined by unwavering duty, only to find herself facing a chilling betrayal in the most unexpected of places, her own driveway. There was no greeting, no opportunity to speak, not even a questioning, "Can I help you?" Instead, commands were barked, guns were drawn, and a cacophony of shouts dehumanized her in an instant. It was a terrifying paradox, unfolding with such rapid ferocity that every second also stretched into an agonizing eternity, each detail searing itself into her memory. The crunch of tires on her familiar gravel, the sharp screech of walkie-talkies, the unsettling grip of officers' hands on their weapons, a grip born not of cautious readiness but of something far colder, far more predatory. Danielle Rucker was no stranger to intensity. She had navigated 2 combat tours in Afghanistan, commanded tactical units under relentless fire, and honed her skills training alongside the nation's elite K-9 handlers. Yet, nothing in her extensive experience had prepared her for the visceral terror that comes not from the chaos of a war zone, but from the stark reality of being a black woman standing in her own front yard. This was a fear distinct and deeply unsettling, a profound violation of the peace she had fought so hard to secure. The afternoon had begun with the quiet promise of a typical late Sunday in Modesto, California. The sun, a warm, golden presence, had just begun its slow descent behind the trees as Danielle completed the long drive back from Sacramento, where she'd spent the day helping her cousin move into a new apartment. Weary but content, she was dressed in comfortable leggings, her trusty combat boots, and a faded Fort Bragg hoodie, the unofficial uniform of her off-duty life. In the back of her SUV, her 2 loyal partners, Rex and Nova, both Belgian Malinois, rested silently in their crates, perfectly calm and alert, a testament to the rigorous training she had instilled in them. As she pulled into her driveway, the remote for her garage door clipped to her sun visor. The modest 2-bedroom ranch house greeted her. It sat nestled on a quiet street, its trimmed hedges neatly lining the sidewalk, where retirees often offered friendly waves to passing cars. It wasn't ostentatious, but it was hers, a home she had painstakingly bought herself after honorably leaving the Army. Tapping the button, she watched the garage door begin its slow ascent, and that's when she first noticed her. A woman stood on the sidewalk across the street, watching, her phone held conspicuously to her ear, lips moving in hushed conversation. Danielle squinted, trying to place the unfamiliar face. Slim build, perhaps in her early 50s, a blonde bob, athletic wear, a yoga mat tucked under one arm as if she'd just come from a class. Danielle dismissed it, assuming a new neighbor, offering a polite nod before continuing to back her SUV into the open garage. Less than 3 minutes later, the quiet was shattered. 4 sirens pierced the air, growing louder with alarming speed. What unfolded next felt ripped from the most unsettling kind of cable television drama. Police cruisers swerved into her cul-de-sac like a coordinated tactical operation. One vehicle aggressively cut off her driveway, trapping her before she could even turn off the engine. Another blocked the street behind her, doors already flung open, officers spilling out. "Step out of the vehicle!" an officer roared, his voice cutting through the sudden silence. Danielle blinked, confusion clouding her mind. "Excuse me?" she managed, rolling her window halfway down. "Hands where we can see them now," a second voice commanded. She glanced left, then right, searching for someone, anyone, else. But there was no one. The guns were pointed directly at her car, A tall, white male officer, perhaps in his late 30s with a shaved head, advanced steadily toward her, his weapon drawn and aimed. Another crouched low behind a neighbor's bush, also armed, his body language tense. "Ma'am," the first officer stated, his voice devoid of warmth, "we got a call about a break-in. You match the description." Danielle's hands remained firmly on the steering wheel, her heart beating a steady rhythm against her ribs. When she spoke, her voice was low, yet carried the unmistakable ring of tempered steel. "This is my house." "License and registration," the officer barked again. "My house is right there," Danielle stated, her voice remarkably calm despite the cold barrels aimed at her. "I'm a veteran. My name's on the deed." But they weren't listening. They rarely do, not at first. From the back of the SUV, a low, guttural bark rumbled from Rex, a warning. Nova, ever the stoic, remained perfectly still in her crate, her training holding her motionless unless commanded. Danielle leaned slightly to the left, her knuckle tapping twice against the center console with a practiced, almost imperceptible precision. A silent command. With a soft, mechanical click, the vehicle's locks disengaged, and that's when everything irrevocably shifted. The officers, still braced for a perceived threat, hadn't yet grasped what was about to emerge from the back of that SUV. Slowly, deliberately, the rear door of the vehicle swung open. The officers' grips on their weapons tightened, their eyes narrowed, bracing for some hidden assailant, perhaps another threat. But what stepped out was not what they expected. First, a sleek black nose poked out, twitching slightly as it sampled the air. Then, with sharp, precise movements, a powerful, muscular Belgian Malinois stepped down onto the driveway. This was Rex, his black and tan coat gleaming, his movements fluid and perfectly trained. His intelligent eyes swept across the tense scene, calculating every angle, every shadow. Nova followed, lighter in color but no less formidable, her every action just as controlled. There was no aggressive barking, no growling, just an intense, quiet, steady presence. Each dog wore a tan, tactical vest, clearly marked with bold, unmissable lettering. U.S. Military Canine, do not pet. Rex moved to Danielle's side without a spoken word, a shadow in her periphery. Nova flanked her on the opposite side, completing the formidable tableau. They didn't look scared. They looked like they were waiting for a mission, ready for deployment. For a long, stretched moment, no one spoke. The only sounds were the crackle of police radio static and the shallow, rapid breathing of the officers. Finally, Danielle stepped out, her movements slow and deliberate, utterly unhurried. Her posture was relaxed, yet her presence was unshakable. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't argue. "My name is Danielle Rucker," she stated, her voice clear and resonant. "I live here. I just got back from Sacramento. These are my dogs, military, working dogs. I served 12 years active duty, 6 in K-9 special operations." The officers remained frozen, their guns still leveled. Slowly, with an almost exaggerated deliberation, Danielle reached into her pocket. She pulled out a leather wallet, flipped it open, and presented her veteran ID alongside her California driver's license. One officer, a shorter Latino man in his mid-40s, with a badge reading Perez, stepped forward, his eyes darting from the IDs to Danielle, then to the two imposing dogs. He took the wallet. "These are military dogs?" he asked, his voice cracking slightly, the aggression in his tone noticeably diminished. "Yes," she replied, her gaze steady. "Trained by me. They don't bite unless I tell them to." As if on cue, Rex took one small step closer, a calm, silent assertion of his presence. Perez turned his head, his gaze sweeping toward the woman still standing across the street. The blonde neighbor remained, arms crossed, her phone clutched in one hand like a victorious trophy. "You called this in?" he asked her. "Yes," the woman responded, a defensive edge to her voice. "I didn't know who she was. She looked suspicious. Big black truck, dogs in the back. You thought I was breaking into my own house," Danielle interrupted, looking straight at the woman, her eyes unwavering. The woman shrugged, a flippant gesture. "I didn't recognize you." "You've lived here how long?" Danielle pressed, her voice a low, steel-edged question. The woman hesitated. "A few months." "I've lived here 5 years," Danielle stated, her voice cutting through the tension. "I mowed that lawn every Saturday morning for 5 years. You never thought to wave?" The woman blinked, her composure finally fracturing. "I just thought—" Danielle looked back at Officer Perez. "Am I under arrest?" He looked profoundly uncomfortable, shifting his weight, his eyes darting to the other officers. Officers who were now visibly uncomfortable, slowly lowering their weapons, a sheepish air about them. "No, ma'am. There's obviously been a mistake." Danielle didn't respond immediately. Her gaze settled on her dogs. Rex, sensing the shift, sat down beside her, his powerful body a reassuring anchor. Nova, ever vigilant, lay down, her head resting on her paws, but her eyes never leaving the scene. Danielle knelt between them, offering each a gentle pat. The other officers began to back away, slow and deliberate, one of them muttering into his radio. Officer Perez, his face flushed with embarrassment, handed back her ID. "You understand, ma'am? We had to respond." "You had to respond," Danielle echoed, her voice still level yet cutting like a honed blade. "But you didn't have to roll up with your guns out like I was robbing a bank." He offered no reply, only shifting uncomfortably. "You could have asked questions. You could have looked at the mailbox. Rucker, right there. Or maybe just, I don't know, said hello like a human being." Her voice never rose, but the quiet, clear, undeniable force of her words left no room for argument. Perez's discomfort deepened. The remaining officers were already retreating to their cruisers, their tactical posture crumbling into hasty retreat. Danielle remained still, her dogs beside her, their watchful eyes mirroring her own. Across the street, the blonde neighbor, her phone now lowered, had begun to quietly walk away, offering no apology, only a swift, silent retreat. Danielle exhaled, not with relief, but with a profound sense of release, like a pressure valve finally giving way. What she didn't know yet was that one of her neighbors had filmed the entire harrowing encounter. The video was not shaky or distorted. It was crystal clear, shot from a porch across the street by an older man named Franklin Yates. Franklin was a man of few words, but keen observation, seeing everything from his quiet vantage point. He didn't come out much anymore, his knees shot from decades in construction, and his world made quieter since his wife had passed the year before. But every afternoon, he sat on that porch, a bottle of root beer in one hand, his phone never far from the other. He hadn't expected to capture anything dramatic that day, but the moment the police started yelling, he instinctively hit record. He'd seen Danielle come and go for years, a familiar, steady presence. She'd even shoveled his driveway during that freak freeze 2 winters ago, never asking for a dime. So, when they boxed her in, like a suspect in a manhunt, he hit the red button. In the video, the shouts of the police are starkly audible. Danielle's calm, deliberate movements are clearly visible. The faint click as her dogs step out of the SUV is captured, and the palpable shift in the air as the officers finally register the military working dog vests is undeniable. The video was unedited. No music, no slow motion, just raw footage, 74 seconds long. That night, someone, perhaps Franklin's grandchild or another neighbor, uploaded it online. It took less than 24 hours to hit 500,000 views. Danielle, oblivious to the digital storm brewing, was inside her home. She sat on her couch, Rex curled protectively at her feet, Nova positioned by the door, ever alert. She still hadn't eaten, her keys remained in her coat pocket, and she hadn't even taken off her boots. Then her phone buzzed, a text from her cousin. "Girl, is that you in this video?" Danielle frowned, clicked the link. She watched it once, then again, then a third time, slower, dissecting each frame. It was strange, seeing herself from the outside like that. Her composed posture, the way Rex stayed utterly glued to her leg, the subtle protective movement as Nova gently stepped forward, placing herself between Danielle and the perceived threat. Between Danielle and the officer, a silent, powerful barrier. She didn't cry. She didn't get angry. She simply sat there, staring at the screen, a quiet intensity in her gaze. It wasn't until the fifth watch that a chilling detail caught her attention. The look on the blonde neighbor's face in the corner of the video. It wasn't fear, not even concern, just a blank, detached expression, as if she weren't observing a person at all, but merely an object. Danielle leaned back on the couch, closing her eyes. It wasn't that this was the first time she had been profiled. It wasn't. But this incident cut deeper precisely because it happened in the one place she was supposed to be safe. Her home, her driveway, surrounded by the very flags she had sworn to defend. She considered calling her cousin back, thought about explaining everything. But what was there truly to explain? Rex let out a soft sigh and nudged her leg, a comforting presence. She looked down at him, then reached for her boots. She needed air. Outside, just half a block away, the story was already spreading like wildfire. Franklin, the quiet man on the porch, was receiving calls from people he hadn't heard from in years. Some lauded him as brave. Others questioned if he'd orchestrated the whole event. A few anonymous numbers delivered terse warnings to mind his own business. And the neighbor, the blonde one, whose name turned out to be Kimberlyn Follner, a part-time employee at a wellness spa who posted inspirational quotes every morning, found her phone blowing up too. The comments under the video were brutal. Typical. She thought she was a hero. This is why people don't trust the cops. She really called the police because a black woman had a truck and 2 dogs? Others were far worse, harsher, unfiltered. Someone even found her Facebook page and began reposting screenshots of her seemingly wholesome content, creating a jarring contrast. By Tuesday morning, news vans were parked 2 streets away from Danielle's home. She opened her door and spotted them instantly. "Lord," she whispered. Officer Perez had already submitted his report, and his department was now scrambling, caught completely off guard. They hadn't anticipated the military dogs. They hadn't anticipated the crystal-clear video. And they certainly hadn't anticipated the furious backlash. Internal Affairs quickly opened a review. The police chief issued a public statement acknowledging procedural missteps and reaffirming their commitment to community safety. But no one from the department came to Danielle directly. Not yet. The silence from the department, however, spoke louder than any public apology ever could. By Wednesday, Danielle's driveway had transformed into a makeshift checkpoint. Reporters in khakis and polos lingered near the curb, ever present. Every time she opened her front door, at least one microphone was thrust into her face. Danielle, do you believe this was racially motivated? Were your dogs trained to protect you in situations like this? Do you plan to file a complaint against the officers involved? She offered no answers. Not yet. She simply walked Rex and Nova, kept to herself, and tried to act as if things were normal, even though nothing was. That afternoon, the Modesto Tribune ran a headline that hit harder than she expected. Veteran homeowner confronted by police in her own driveway. Military canines may have prevented tragedy. It was true, and it was terrifying. She kept replaying the scene in her mind, the way the officers had approached her. Officers stood there, guns drawn, beads of sweat on their brows, fingers hovering precariously close to the triggers. She recalled how Rex and Nova, unwavering and stoic, had stood their ground like seasoned soldiers. Most people couldn't grasp the true capabilities of those dogs. She had trained them to disarm armed suspects, to detect explosives, to track fugitives across 8 miles of unforgiving desert terrain. They could effortlessly leap over 6-foot walls and sink their jaws into flesh with 400 pounds of pressure, but only if she uttered a single word. Yet, that day, the word wasn't needed. Their mere presence spoke volumes, a silent declaration more powerful than any command she could have given. After the video went viral, her inbox flooded with messages, hundreds of them. They came from fellow veterans, from dog handlers, from parents, from complete strangers who saw their own experiences reflected in her face, in her unwavering posture, in the profound stillness she maintained even as they shouted at her as if she were a threat. And then, one message stood out. It was from a former Marine named Tanya Levins, now a K-9 trainer in San Diego. Tanya wrote, "Your control in that moment was incredible. Most people would have panicked. Those dogs didn't just protect you physically. They told the world exactly who you are. You didn't raise your voice, but they heard you anyway." Danielle read it 3 times. The truth was, she had been scared. Not shaking, not crying, but scared in that deep, buried way. The kind of fear you carry in silence because showing it means letting someone else win. Later that evening, someone finally did knock on her door. It wasn't the police. It was Kimberlyn Faulkner, the blonde neighbor. She wore a blue button-up shirt, slacks, and nervousness like a palpable scent. "I wanted to apologize," Kimberlyn began, before Danielle could even utter a word. "I didn't know who you were. I didn't mean for it to go that far." Danielle didn't invite her in. She stood in the doorway, Rex positioned calmly at her heel, Nova watching silently from just inside. A quiet, formidable presence. "You didn't know who I was?" Danielle asked, her voice calm, direct. "But you still called 911 and said I was breaking into a house." Kimberlyn hesitated, fumbling for words. "It looks suspicious." "What looks suspicious?" Danielle tilted her head slightly. "The truck? The dogs? Or me?" Kimberlyn stammered. I just didn't recognize the car." "I've had that car since I moved in," Danielle stated plainly. "I don't look at cars." "Exactly." A long silence stretched between them. "I'm sorry," Kimberlyn said again, quieter this time. Danielle nodded once, a gesture that was neither acceptance nor forgiveness, but simple acknowledgement. "I hope you tell your friends that," she said. "I will." And, I hope, next time you pause before you reach for your phone, like it's a weapon." Kimberlin offered no reply, only a slight nod, then turned and walked away. Danielle closed the door behind her, and for the first time in days, she sat down at her dining table and let herself breathe. Not because it was over, but because she was ready. Across town, however, things were just beginning to escalate. The mayor himself now wanted a meeting. The next morning, she met with him. Not because she had asked to, but because he had to. Mayor Douglas Rern, a man in his mid-50s, clean-shaven, perpetually sounding as if he were just one sentence away from a campaign ad, had requested the meeting. To listen and learn. He arrived with a PR assistant, clutching a legal pad and a small recorder, just in case. Danielle didn't bother to dress up. She wore her usual attire, cargo pants, boots, and the same faded hoodie. Rex and Nova remained close, seated calmly behind her as the mayor began to speak. "We deeply regret what happened to you, Miss Rucker," he started, his hands folded meticulously on the table between them. "It's unfortunate. What you experienced doesn't reflect the values of Modesto." Danielle watched him closely, offering neither a nod nor a smile. "You say it doesn't reflect the values," she replied, her voice as calm and steady as ever. "But it happened right in front of my own garage, and if my dogs hadn't been there, I'm not sure I'd be here either." The PR assistant shifted awkwardly in her seat. The mayor cleared his throat. "We're reviewing protocols. There'll be retraining. Officer Perez will be part of the internal review. And the neighbor, the one who called, she's issued a written apology." Danielle cut him off. "She didn't apologize to me, she apologized to the internet." Another strained pause filled the room. The mayor now looked distinctly uncomfortable. "I served this country for over a decade," she continued, her gaze unwavering. "Not so people could point a gun at me while I'm unlocking my own garage." He tried to interject, but she didn't allow it. "You want to talk about training? Train your people to stop jumping at shadows every time they see someone who looks like me driving something bigger than a Honda Civic." Silence descended, thick and heavy. Danielle leaned back in her chair, a picture of quiet resolve. Rex's ears twitched, alert but relaxed. Nova let out a soft, almost imperceptible yawn. "I don't need a medal," she added, her voice softening slightly but losing none of its edge. "I don't need a banner on Main Street. I need to know I can pull into my driveway without worrying someone's going to assume I'm a threat before they even know my name." Mayor Rayburn nodded slowly, a forced concession. "You have every right to feel that way." "I know," she said, her tone definitive. "I'm not asking for permission." He looked at his assistant, who quickly clicked off the recorder. The meeting ended without handshakes. Back home, Danielle found an envelope slid under her door. No return address, just a single note inside. "Thank you for standing your ground. My daughter saw your video. She asked me if she would be safe if she grew up to look like you. I didn't have an answer, but now I do." It wasn't signed, but that note meant more to her than any press conference ever could. The neighborhood changed in small ways that week. A few people crossed the street specifically to say hello. A couple left flowers near her porch. A little boy on a scooter stopped and asked if he could say hi to the army dogs. She let him. Rex offered a gentle sniff, while Nova merely stared, unbothered, queen-like as always. But not everything shifted for the better. 2 officers involved in the incident were quietly moved to desk duty. The department didn't explicitly admit guilt, but they also didn't fight the move. As for Kimberlyn Fallner, she deleted her social media accounts and started parking 2 blocks away instead of using her driveway. No one really saw her out jogging anymore. Danielle didn't gloat, didn't celebrate. This wasn't a win. It was a stark reminder. Just what had happened. And sometimes that was the part that hurt the most, because for a moment it felt like she was back in uniform again, forced to prove herself to people who had never even bothered to learn how to pronounce her name correctly. But it wasn't over. Not until she told her story in her own words. The first email came from a local podcast host, then a journalist from the Sacramento Sentinel, followed by a producer from Good Morning Fresno, and finally, a national outlet. They all wanted to hear from the woman with the dogs. Some requested live interviews, some offered to fly her out. One even asked if the dogs could be part of the interview for visual impact. Danielle turned them all down at first, but then her cousin, Zora, the same one she had helped move a week earlier, called again. "Danny," Zora said, her voice brimming with passionate conviction, "you don't talk. Someone else will, and they'll mess it up. You need to say it yourself. Your words." Danielle was quiet for a moment. "I'm not trying to go viral," she murmured. "You already did," Zora retorted. "The question is what you want to do with it now." Zora wasn't wrong. Danielle didn't seek the attention, but it wasn't going away. So she chose one outlet, just one, a small independent journalist named Tony Wren, who lived in the Valley and ran a web series called Front Porch Stories. No makeup teams, no flashy cuts, just a folding chair, a microphone, and a camera. They filmed in Danielle's front yard. There was no script, no elaborate plan. Tony simply asked, "Can you tell me what happened that day?" Danielle nodded, took a deep breath, and she told it. Not just the terrifying moment they pulled up with, guns drawn, but everything that came before it. She spoke about her deployment in Kandahar, about losing 2 soldiers to a roadside bomb, about the arduous nights spent teaching Rex to identify human scents in swirling sandstorms, about Nova's first successful mission. She spoke about coming home and believing she could finally breathe freely. "I gave this country my time, my body, and parts of my peace," she said. "And when I came back, all I wanted was a patch of grass and a place to walk my dogs without someone looking at me like I don't belong." Tony didn't interrupt. Danielle went on. She talked about the unsettling silence that followed the yelling, the way the neighbor hadn't flinched when she saw the guns, the chilling truth that the officers only backed off when they recognized the vests of her military dogs, not her face, not her humanity. "I had to be standing next to 2 military dogs for them to believe I was worth listening to," she concluded, her voice unwavering. Think about that. That interview reached more people than the original video because it was quiet, real. No yelling, no elaborate production, just one woman telling her truth on camera as if she were speaking to a trusted friend across a kitchen table. The response was overwhelming. Letters poured in. Donations were made to veteran support groups in her name. Messages arrived from white neighbors admitting they'd made assumptions about people who looked like her, and even from police officers thanking her for not letting things escalate, when, in truth, it was they who had escalated the situation in the first place. Danielle didn't ask for sympathy. She didn't even ask for change. She simply told her story, just asked people to pay attention. A week later, the Modesto Police Department officially added a new protocol for handling civilian calls related to suspicious activity. Officers were now required to verify property ownership through dispatch before initiating a stop, especially in residential neighborhoods. They called it the Rucker Rule. She didn't smile when she heard about it, just gave a quiet hum of acknowledgement and went on with her day. At the dog park a few days later, a woman with a stroller waved and said, "Thank you for your service." Danielle simply nodded. But the moment that truly resonated with her came at the grocery store. A teenager, maybe 17, walked up to her by the produce section wearing a hoodie, looking nervous. "You're the lady with the dogs, right?" Danielle nodded. He paused, looked around, then confided, "My mom said you were scary." Danielle raised an eyebrow. "Did she?" "Yeah, but I don't think you are." Danielle chuckled, then leaned closer. "Tell your mom I'm scary when I haven't had coffee." That's it. The kid laughed, a genuine, unburdened sound. While she found peace and a touch of humor in these interactions, what she truly craved now was something far harder to ask for: understanding. She hadn't planned to speak at the town forum. It had been scheduled by the city council as part of their listening initiative, held at the John Muir Community Center. Folding chairs were arranged in neat rows. Microphones with short cords stood ready, and the coffee tasted like melted cardboard. Danielle sat in the back, her hoodie pulled over her braids, Rex lying calmly at her feet, Nova asleep peacefully under her chair. She wasn't going to say anything. She had only come to ensure they didn't twist the story into something it wasn't. But after the third person stood up and used placating words like misunderstanding, communication breakdown, and mutual responsibility, something in her chest tightened. So she stood up, and when she walked to the microphone, every head in the room turned. She didn't smile, didn't clear her throat. She simply began. "My name's Danielle Rucker. I live on Rosewood Drive. I'm a veteran. I served this country because I believed in something bigger than myself." All eyes were on her. You could hear a quiet cough 3 rows back. That's how silent the room had become. "Last week, I pulled into my own driveway after helping my cousin move. I hadn't even turned off the car before guns were pointed at my head." A few heads in the audience dropped. "People keep asking how I stayed calm. I didn't stay calm because I wanted to. I stayed calm because people like me don't get the luxury of panic. If I'd yelled or moved too fast or reached for my phone, this conversation might be happening without me here." Someone in the front whispered something, but she didn't stop. "I didn't curse. I didn't fight. I didn't resist. All I did was exist, and that was enough to make someone scared enough to call 911. She turned slightly, scanning the faces in the room. "That should bother you." A murmur moved through the room, a ripple of unease. "I had 2 highly trained military K9s with me. You know what that says? It says I've been trusted to handle life and death situations in war zones, but I'm not trusted to be in my own driveway. Apparently, I still can't be trusted on my own street without someone assuming I'm a criminal." She paused, not for dramatic effect, but simply to breathe, to let the weight of her words settle. "You want to fix this? Then stop acting like this is about one bad call or one bad officer. This is about a system that gave one woman the confidence to call the cops on her neighbor because she didn't recognize her face, and gave those cops permission to draw weapons because they didn't take 2 seconds to ask a question." A few quiet claps rippled through the audience. Danielle looked toward the back of the room, her voice softening slightly, but losing none of its power. I'm not angry. Not really, I'm just tired. Tired of being told I'm the exception when I'm just the latest. The clapping grew louder now, a swelling tide of agreement. Danielle stepped back from the microphone, not waiting for a round of applause, not lingering. She simply walked back to her seat, her dogs following without a sound. Later that night, the clip of her speech would be shared across platforms, spreading rapidly. Not because it was dramatic, but because it was honest. That's all people wanted sometimes. Not answers, just honesty. But before anything could truly change, someone had to feel uncomfortable first. A week after the forum, Danielle sat alone on her porch. No cameras, no official statements, no furious clicks or trending hashtags. Just a cool evening, her boots propped up, a mug of tea in one hand, and Nova's head resting gently under the other. She finally felt still. Not because everything was fixed, but because she'd spoken her truth out loud, and no one had been able to silence it. She didn't want to be known as the woman with the dogs forever. She wasn't looking to be the face of a movement. She just wanted her peace back, and in a strange, profound way, speaking up had given her a small piece of it. Sometimes that's all people truly want, to be heard without having to earn it with a badge, a title, or trauma. Rex stirred beside her, his ears flicking as a car passed slowly down the street. Danielle glanced over and gave him a slight hand signal. He settled back down immediately, perfectly obedient. They were trained to act, but they were also trained to wait. A few days later, she received a message from an old friend she hadn't seen since basic training. He wrote, "I saw what happened. My daughter asked me why someone would be scared of a soldier. I didn't know what to say. Thanks for helping me figure it out." She read it twice, a soft smile gracing her lips. That was the thing. Sometimes it takes one moment, a wrong assumption, a barking command, a silent dog to hold up a mirror to the world. And not everyone likes what they see when it's held that close. Danielle never wanted to go viral. She didn't want to be in a headline or a trending tag. But if her story made one person pause before judging, if it made one officer ask instead of assume, if it made one teenager walk a little taller, maybe that was worth it. She looked out across her street. The same trimmed hedges, the same old mailbox, the same place she'd pulled into that fateful Sunday. It hadn't changed, but she had. And maybe, slowly, that would be enough to shift everything around her, too. Because the truth is, she didn't need anyone to tell her she belonged. She knew it. She had always known it. Permission to belong. She never did. She just needed the world to stop pretending like she was the problem in a place she'd earned 10 times over. If you've listened this far, remember this. Your story matters. Your face, your voice, your presence, they all matter. But sometimes the world doesn't recognize that until you force it to look. So if you ever find yourself in a moment where you're being silenced, overlooked, or misunderstood, stand firm, speak clear, and don't ever let fear decide the ending. And when the world finally pauses to listen, make sure they hear.